Mall Studios. This is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
You know, that music is just a little too happy, considering the subject we're going to talk about right now. It is an amazing story, but whenever you talk about the Holocaust, it's just it's a reminder of how bad we can be as human beings. And Jack J. Hersch is the son of a man who went through that hell. I mean, really went through it, and survived to go on to have a family. Jack is on the phone right now. He's got a book called Death March Escape, the remarkable story of how a man who twice escaped the Nazi Holocaust. Jack's father, Dave, is a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. I was looking at the synopsis of the book, and it sounds like he was down to 80 pounds. He was on a 30-mile death march. They down to 80 pounds, and they make them walk to their own death 30 miles.
Yeah, gosh.
Unbelievable. But he escapes not just once, but twice. And then Jack, I guess in doing some research, found a photograph, and that just kind of propelled everything. So he's written a book about his father. It's called Death March Escape. Jack, in addition to being the author of this book, he's a researcher, a strategic advisor to corporate management and investment institutions. He's a guest lecturer at MIT, USC, and UC Berkeley. I would love to be in the audience of one of his presentations. Jack Hersch, good morning, sir. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Where are you right now?
I'm in beautiful, sunny, warm New York City.
Is it really sunny?
It is 9 degrees this morning.
Oh, okay.
I heard you're there.
Well, that's right. Robin will be there in 2 weeks. She's going to see her first grandson. How about that?
Yes.
Oh, congratulations to her.
Thank you.
And you are your father's son. Let's talk about your dad. How many children did your father have?
2. I have a brother 4 years younger than me.
Oh my gosh! The fact that even the two of you are here is a testament to this amazing man's his survival. I don't know what to say. Just his decision that he's just going to fight back and he's not going to let anybody take him. Right? Am I right about that?
Well, I think that's exactly right. So he was deported to the concentration camps in the spring of 1944, as were all of Hungary's Jews. And firstly, he had to be lucky. He had 25 family members go with him from his town, parents, brothers, and sisters. He was one of 8, so brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts. Wow. 18 of them were killed within the first few hours of arriving at Auschwitz, and then the others were sent off to concentration camps. My father he was a fun and funny and interesting and engaging guy, and I think that partly his personality, that outwardly outgoing personality, helped him survive. I mean, I just think he spoke 8 languages, 9 when you include English, which he didn't speak at the time. But connecting with the guards and with the capos and those over him in the camps, I think had a lot to do with his survival.
Tell us a bit at the end of the story first, if you could. In other words, how is it that you're in New York? What was your childhood like? Did he talk about those years at all?
Sure, great question. Yeah, actually he did. So one of the reasons I wrote the book was that everything you hear about concentration camp survivors talks about or implies that they are morose and downbeat and haven't cracked a smile or told a joke since the day they walked into the camps or were shipped into the camps. My father was nothing like that. He was a funny guy, an interesting guy, an engaging guy, loved to talk, and frankly loved to tell the story of his survival. The time he would tell it most often was Passover. Passover is the Jewish holiday that commemorates the Jews escaping from Egypt. Well, my father, in the middle of that story, would tell his story of escaping twice from the death marches.
Sure.
And he would tell it to anybody who asked him as well. He just was not that guy to hold back on it. And because of it, my brother and I were brought up always knowing about his past, always being aware that part of our makeup was that survival mechanism that enabled him to survive that.
And he moved to America right after being rescued, or when did he make that move?
No, so the process was, so he was rescued in May of 1945 by the 65th Infantry Division. He spent 18 months in a hospital. He then, after release from the hospital, went to Israel for 10 years. And in 1958, right after I was born, we came to America.
Wow.
To New York.
Wow. So you were born in where were you born? In Hungary?
I was born in Haifa, actually, in Israel. Yes.
Oh, in Israel.
And then, and then right after I was born, you know, America is a land of opportunity, and Israel was a difficult place to earn a living, particularly if you had no education. And my father had a 5th grade education, and so he came here. And it worked out for him and my mother.
What did he do? What was his occupation?
So he drifted into the senior citizen home business, which we now call assisted living. It was in the northeastern coast of the U.S., New Jersey, Long Island. It had attracted a lot of concentration camp survivors because you didn't need an education; you needed compassion and a desire to work hard. And he had that, and it worked out for him. He started as a busboy and worked his way up to saving enough money to buy a small place, and did well with it.
Okay, so forgive me for not knowing this. Every once in a while, I have to ask a question that shows my ignorance. But does a Hungarian person speak German? I don't know.
Great question. So actually, I think Europeans generally are very good with languages. It's because of how many languages are near them. My father was Hungarian and so spoke Hungarian, but because his town had been Romanian for a long time as well, he spoke Hungarian and Romanian. The Jews of the town tended to speak Yiddish among themselves back in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. So he spoke Yiddish. Yiddish is a very close first cousin to German. So he quickly picked up German, flawless German.
Okay.
And then he learned Czechoslovakian and Spanish and Polish in the concentration camps.
So, like a lot of us who can sort of kind of speak a second language, but we can't really call ourselves bilingual, we would never feel comfortable enough with that second language to joke with anybody, let alone our captors. But you mentioned that he was funny and liked to joke. Did he joke with the people who were holding him captive? Is that part of what helped save him?
I don't know that joke is the right word, but he speaks of having friendships. There was a gypsy capo that ran the latrine commando. They called these groups of people who worked in areas commandos, with a K in German. He spoke his language, which I don't know what it was. He spoke German. He spoke Polish to some of the Polish capos. So yes, he was conversantly fluent in all those languages.
That is amazing. That's really an amazing story. And in all of his life, you never knew him as a bitter person, even though he went through stuff that easily could have made a person bitter.
No, he never was. It's a great point. I mean, look, he wasn't. He was certainly not happy that he went through it.
Sure.
He was certainly angry at the Germans of that time.
Sure.
For what he went through. But no, he carried no bitterness around with him. He lived his life to the fullest and felt that, you know, it was in his past.
So tell us about the photograph that changed things for you.
Sure. So it was interesting. What happened was I got a phone call from a cousin of mine. My father had passed away 6 years earlier. This is in the early 2000s. My father had passed away. And she calls me up to tell me that my father's on the internet. She was searching for something for her mother, same last name, original last name. And this photo shows up, and it's a photo that I don't own. It's a photo of my father as a teenager. It's a headshot. It's taken. He was a model actually in his teenage years before he was sent off to concentration camp. And I have some photos that are similar, but not this one. So I didn't understand. Yes.
Is this the cover of the book? Is that the photo on the cover?
No, interesting about the cover. So after my father, just to digress for a second, after my father had been rescued by the 65th Infantry and been in the hospital for a while and was recovering, he had friends in the hospital. And someone turned up a concentration camp uniform, and a number of them decided to take pictures of themselves in a concentration camp uniform and kept them. I mean, remember, they were kids. They were teenagers or in their early 20s, and they wanted to have something to remember that part of their lives by.
Yeah.
My father had that photo taken. He kept it, and now I have it. But the photo that was on the concentration camp website that my cousin had come across was a photo I don't have. It obviously looks alike. It's a headshot, but he's wearing a suit with an open collared shirt. It's a good looking shot. And somehow the concentration camp had gotten it, and when they opened their own website in the 1990s, they put this up there with a caption saying that he'd been found by the Friedman family, the Friedman family being a local Austrian family, and had been kept with. They hid him until the Americans came through. And so I wrote them and I said, how do you have this picture, and how do you know that story? Because as far as I knew, my father never told them.
Yeah.
And my father certainly never gave them the picture. And that was a whole story in and of itself.
Wow. That is an amazing find for you and your family. So we're, in the book, are there things that we read and that we learn about that were actually new for you because of research you were doing for the book?
Oh, yeah, a tremendous amount. I mean, just to give one example. So the family that rescued my father, my father had been on 2 death marches. The first one he escaped, was recaptured. The second one he escapes. And he's found the next morning by this family, this husband and wife. And the husband is actually a brick mason and runs a small brick mason company. He has employees and he does okay. His house is a quarter of a mile away from this small path where they found my father. And they agree to hide him in their house. Well, my father didn't know this his entire life. I found this during the research. But downstairs was where my father was hiding, and upstairs they were billeting SS combat troops the entire time he was there. And stunning to find that out. I also found that this family was listening to American radio on the shortwave radio, and had friends who were gendarmes, who were like local police officers, who were listening with them. These people were really risk takers in terms of the fact that they were under German occupation. So that's one example.
Wow.
Another one that comes to mind is, so while my father was hiding with them, they had to send him out into a field to wait out a little bit of the war because the fighting was getting too close and they felt it was just too risky. They actually sent him to a barn in their field. My father couldn't find the barn. He got lost. And my father, in telling his story, would say that he got lost, but of course he has no idea actually how he got lost. And in my research, I think I've found exactly how he got lost, and because of that, exactly where in the field he hid for nearly a week until the family found him again. And of course, I discussed the process of learning that.
Wow. So the property must have been huge. I mean, it seems like you try to imagine finding a barn, you would think it'd be easy to find a barn.
Well, yes, you would think it was easy, and if you made the right series of turns, you'd find it. This family lived in a small hamlet, and the hamlet they were all farmers, with the exception of this one family. And so when my father went out to the field, if you made a couple of left turns, there were a number of barns. But if you made first a left and then a right, there was nothing but field. And this is late at night and during the war, blackout.
Wow.
No sight, no sight. And from what I can tell, it was also cloudy out, so the moon didn't matter. There was no light. And if you made a wrong turn, not only could he not find the barn, he couldn't find his way back.
Oh, wow.
And so he ended up in a field for a week.
A week? Oh, my God.
They gave him a few potatoes on the possibility that they wouldn't be able to feed him one day. Well, they didn't feed him for a week. But remember, this is a 160-pound man who weighed 80-odd pounds at the time. They'd fed him for a few days, so he had a little bit of sustenance in him. And now he was kind of going through it again, and I think his body could handle it. That's
an amazing. Yeah, wow.
And this had to have been very emotional for you, because you say that you physically traveled to all of these places.
Yes, that's exactly right. So, yeah, I got on a plane. I went to the concentration camp where he was. He was actually in 2 camps, which were satellite camps of each other, a couple of miles apart. I found precisely where he worked. The building where he worked was called the Stone Crusher Building. There was a huge stone crushing mechanism in there. It was part of the granite mine. That building is still there, and so I walked the grounds that he walked 70-odd years ago. And then, exactly as you point out, when I went that night and discovered how he got lost, or I'm almost certain, because of course he's no longer alive, and B, he didn't know how he got lost. But when I found that, and then when I stumbled on exactly where I think he hid for a week, emotional is probably, a soft version of the right word.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, this is maybe a weird question, but were you close to your father, and did this research make you closer even after his passing?
Great question. And yes, so my mom died, our mom, I should say, died when I was 13 and my brother was 9. And so my father essentially not only was trying to build a business, but he raised us. He got us food. He was our guy. And yeah, there were a number of emotions. A, to discover that there were parts of his story that he didn't tell, probably because he didn't want me to know, my brother and I, to know some of the worst of it. That generated emotions like, why wouldn't he have told me these things? And then to understand that, well, he probably didn't tell me because he just didn't think I needed to know how bad it really was. And that, of course, made me love him all the more.
It is kind of an odd circumstance for somebody who's gone through something so horrible to try to explain to somebody, as parents. Do you have children of your own?
I do. I have 3. They're adults now.
Okay, so good. And so that even though they're adults, you still think of them as children. He probably did the same thing with you, or, still children. It's kind of weird. I do the same thing with my son. He's 32, and I'm thinking he's still a child. I forget when I was 32 that I didn't feel like a child in any way. But so where did you go?
No question about it.
And your mom and dad met in Israel?
Yes, my mom was actually Israeli who lived in England for about 20 years, and she taught English. And then my father believed he needed to know English. It was the one language it seems like the only language he didn't know. He used to say that he spoke 10 languages because he spoke Greek too, because if he didn't understand something, well, it was Greek to him. So he met my mom because he and a few of his friends hired her to teach them English, and then he ended up with a teacher.
Oh, that's sweet.
And your dad had a very entrepreneurial spirit because his father was an entrepreneur with a soap factory.
Exactly right. Yes, he owned a small soap factory in their hometown. And my grandfather was a cavalry officer in the Austrian army in World War I. So it was kind of ironic that my father then ends up in a Nazi concentration camp in Austria, of all places.
Does this whole life experience that you have inherited, so to speak, influence your views, your worldviews, your political views, etc.?
I suppose to some degree. I mean, it certainly impacted who I am, and in ways that I don't think I realized until I began working on the book. And I talk about that. I not only wrote a book. I fly planes. I do martial arts. I run marathons. I do a lot of things, and I think some of it is just a constant striving to try to equal an impossible task, to try to equal what my father had done, which of course I'll never actually do. Politically, I would say his experiences probably don't affect me quite as much. My political leanings I'm sort of a centrist. I believe, there's good and bad on both sides of the aisle, and I think my father actually is the same way as well.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. Where did you grow up specifically?
I grew up in the South Shore of Long Island, not far from Manhattan.
Okay, I'm from Merrick. How close were you to Merrick?
Oh, I'm from Long Beach. I'm around the corner.
Okay, yeah.
I used to play pool in Merrick.
Okay.
So.
And it seems like the Nazis were very sneaky. I mean, you say in your book that they came in to where the town that your grandfather's soap factory was, and commandeered the young men and put them on a street cleaning, street building, a lot of things for construction, and then they were allowed to roam free and put their armbands in their pockets and nobody knew.
Well, that's a very interesting point. That when the Nazis came into Hungary, the Hungarian regent, essentially equivalent to a prime minister or a president, he actually protected the Jews of Hungary. But sort of to acquiesce to where the Germans were headed, he put them all the adult men in work battalions. My father, being a high schooler, lived at home and spent a day a week in this battalion. But older brothers were actually sent into these battalions and sent hundreds of miles away to build roads and bridges and do repair work. And actually, one uncle of mine survived only because he was in a work battalion, which they were relatively better treated and relatively better fed than those who ended up in concentration camps.
I think in Schindler's List, I think that's the movie that I'm going to reference, they show a Nazi guard shooting a worker who wasn't working as hard as he thought he should. Just picks him off like a sniper from the top of a building. Did that sort of thing, I mean, did your dad have any of those stories of workers who just maybe got too tired and just couldn't do it, and that was the end of them? They just killed them?
Well, numerous stories of that. Well, I mean, one interesting story he tells is that, so the camp that he was in, it itself had two camps, Gusen 1 and Gusen 2, Gusen being the name of the town. Well, he first was in Gusen 2. In Gusen 2 at night, the latrine barrack was not the barrack where you slept, so you had to go outside if you wanted to go to the bathroom. And the guards at night would just pick off prisoners who were going to the bathroom just for target practice. So there's one example. He has constant examples of decisions to, well, here's a prisoner who's been around too long. My uncle, through marriage, a couple of days into his time at Gusen, he was overweight, he was, not in the best of shape, and the guards decided to kill him. And they asked him to move a boulder that I don't think 5 men could have moved. Obviously, he couldn't move it, and because he couldn't move it, they beat him to death. Oh. And so stories like that, yes, he has more stories than he's told, no doubt.
Now, you think that people would learn, cultures would learn from history with all of this evidence that you are bringing forth, not only yourself but others, but yet people continue to take joy out of killing and maiming others.
Well, and that's part of the reason for writing the book as well. I wanted people to know a number of things. A, as I said, not all survivors were what you read or see or hear about. But B, you just can't forget, because this happened to the Jews. Well, it's happened since to others. It seems to continue to happen, and it can't. And the way we get it to not happen is we remember the impact that it's had when it did happen. And just how long it is.
The book is awesome. I like the fact that we get to know you also. You tell us about your dad, but you also let us know how his background influenced you and the life view. I guess that's what I was trying to ask earlier. The book is on Amazon. It's listen to this. It's number 23. Where did I see that here a second ago? Wait a second. I wrote it down. Yeah, number 23 right now on Amazon. So I found it on Amazon, and you're getting good reviews. One review says that this guy never writes reviews, but he wrote one for this one. Said the book was haunting, excellent. The author did a fantastic job telling the story of his father's escapes from 2 different points of view. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. The first being your father's, second being your own.
And now you're working on a memorial sculpture?
Well, it's not me working on it, actually. So in the exact place in Austria, 7 miles from the concentration camp where he escaped the second time, they're putting up a memorial to him. The town is. The town kind of took his story as his own, because not really because of my father's story, but because of their local person who 7 miles from this concentration camp, from the worst concentration camp in the Reich, some local family did the right thing and hid my father and made sure he survived the war, and they can't be forgotten. Their names are the Friedmans. They have grandchildren who are alive in Austria. What they did was, beyond description, and so they're being memorialized as well as my father, really.
I have a copy of the book. If I have a listener who would like it, it's yours. Call me and I'll take a call at random and leave it here for you. It's called Death March Escape, the remarkable story of a man who twice escaped the Nazi Holocaust. Jack J. Hersch, H-A-R-S-C-H is how you spell Jack's name.
E-H-E-R.
Did I say it wrong? H-E-R. S-C-H. Sorry, I'm looking right at it too. All right, let me take a phone call. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Aaron.
Aaron, you got it. It'll be waiting for you, okay?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You know where we are, right?
Yes, sir. I sure do.
Okay, you got it. Jack, thank you for being on the air with us today. An amazing story. Your father's a good-looking guy, by the way.
Yeah, he knew that, I think. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jack. Good luck with everything.
Thank you very much again.
All right, we'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News, I'm Chris Foster. California Senator Kamala Harris throws her hat in the ring.
I am running for president of the United States. Well, and I'm very excited about it. Senator on ABC's Good Morning America, joining the other Democrats who've announced 2020 presidential campaigns or committees to look into the idea. Democrats and some Republicans are rejecting President Trump's offer of temporary protection for some people here illegally in exchange for border barrier money.
Vice President Mike Pence made the case